when photography expert Margaret Hensley examined the enhanced version of the Parker family portrait in 1976, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The 6-year-old boy standing in front, little Benjamin Parker, had pupils that reflected not the photographer or the farmhouse behind them, but rows upon rows of weathered gravestones. 2 weeks after that photograph was taken in 1904, Benjamin died under mysterious circumstances and was buried in the very cemetery his eyes seemed to foretell. But here is where it becomes truly chilling. The enhancement revealed something else entirely. Something that would shake the foundations of what we thought we knew about photography, death, and the supernatural. The autumn of 1904 painted Ohio's countryside in brilliant shades of amber and crimson, and the Parker family farm sprawled across 200 acres of fertile land that had been in their possession for 3 generations. Jeremiah Parker had built his legacy from nothing, transforming wild prairie into one of the most prosperous agricultural operations in the region. His weathered hands bore the calluses of decades spent working the soil, and his stern, gray eyes reflected the determination that had carried him through countless seasons of triumph and hardship. On this particular October morning, the entire Parker clan had gathered for what would become one of the most analyzed photographs in paranormal history. The occasion was simple enough: a family reunion to celebrate the harvest season and to document the growing family for posterity. Jeremiah's wife, Martha, had insisted on hiring a professional photographer from Columbus, despite the considerable expense. She believed in preserving memories, understanding somehow that moments like these were precious and fleeting. The photographer, a thin man named Theodore Whitman, arrived at the Parker farm just as the morning mist began to lift from the fields. He carried with him an impressive array of equipment, including a large format camera mounted on a sturdy wooden tripod and several glass plates for capturing the images. Theodore had been practicing his craft for over 15 years and had developed a reputation for producing portraits of exceptional clarity and artistic merit. His clients often remarked on his ability to capture not just the physical appearance of his subjects, but something deeper, something that seemed to reveal the very essence of their souls. The Parker family assembled on the wide front porch of their farmhouse, a structure that Jeremiah had built with his own hands, using timber from their own land. The house stood 2 stories tall, with a wraparound porch supported by thick wooden columns and adorned with intricate scrollwork that Martha had insisted upon. Climbing roses, now dormant for the season, created a natural frame around the entrance, and the morning light cast long shadows across the weathered wooden planks. 23 family members gathered for the portrait, ranging from Jeremiah's elderly mother, Sarah, who at 87 still maintained a sharp wit and piercing intelligence, down to the youngest member of the clan, 6-year-old Benjamin Parker. The boy was Jeremiah's grandson, the son of his eldest child, Robert, who had recently taken over much of the day-to-day operations of the farm. Benjamin possessed the kind of innocent charm that made him the center of attention at every family gathering, with bright blue eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischief and sandy brown hair that perpetually fell across his forehead, despite his mother's constant attempts to keep it properly combed. As Theodore arranged the family members for the photograph, he couldn't help but notice young Benjamin's unusual behavior. While the other children fidgeted and complained about having to stand still, Benjamin remained perfectly motionless, staring directly into the camera lens with an intensity that seemed far beyond his years. The boy's gaze was so focused, so penetrating, that Theodore found himself slightly unnerved by the child's unwavering attention. The photographer spent nearly 30 minutes positioning each family member, ensuring that faces were clearly visible and that the composition would be both aesthetically pleasing and historically significant. The adults stood in the back row with Jeremiah and Martha at the center, surrounded by their 4 children and their spouses. The middle row consisted of the teenage grandchildren, and the youngest ones, including Benjamin, were positioned in front where they could be easily seen. When Theodore finally ducked beneath the dark cloth that covered his camera and prepared to expose the glass plate, a strange sensation washed over him. The world seemed to grow quiet, as if nature itself had paused to witness this moment. Even the autumn breeze, which had been rustling the leaves of the oak trees surrounding the farmhouse, suddenly stilled. The photographer later described the experience as feeling like he was standing at the edge of something profound and mysterious, though he couldn't articulate exactly what that something might be. The exposure lasted several seconds, during which time the entire family remained frozen in place like living statues. Benjamin, in particular, seemed to exist in a state of perfect stillness, his small body rigid with concentration, and his eyes fixed unblinkingly on the camera lens. When Theodore finally replaced the lens cap and emerged from beneath the cloth, he noticed that the boy blinked several times, as if awakening from a trance. After the formal portrait was completed, Theodore took several additional photographs of smaller family groups and individual portraits of the older members of the clan. Throughout the entire session, which lasted nearly 2 hours, Benjamin remained unusually quiet and contemplative. His mother, Elizabeth, commented to Martha that she had never seen her normally energetic son display such focus and seriousness. The glass plates were carefully packed and transported back to Theodore's studio in Columbus, where they would be developed and printed using the finest techniques available at the time. The photographer took special care with the family portrait, sensing that this particular image held some special significance, though he couldn't explain why he felt that way. The development process revealed a photograph of remarkable clarity and composition, with every face clearly visible and the lighting perfectly balanced. When the finished photographs were delivered to the Parker farm 2 weeks later, the family gathered around the dining room table to examine them. The portraits were mounted on heavy cardboard and presented in an elegant folder that Theodore had specially ordered from a supplier in New York. The large family portrait was particularly impressive, capturing not only the physical appearance of each family member, but also something intangible about their relationships and personalities. However, by the time the photographs arrived, the Parker family was already deep in mourning. Benjamin had fallen ill just 3 days after the portrait session, developing what initially appeared to be a simple fever. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and despite the efforts of the local physician and a specialist brought in from Columbus, the boy died within a week of becoming sick. The cause of his death remained a mystery, as he had shown no previous signs of illness and had been in perfect health on the day of the photograph. The funeral was held at the small country church where the Parker family had worshipped for generations, and Benjamin was laid to rest in the family cemetery, located on a small hill behind their farmhouse. The cemetery had been established by Jeremiah's grandfather and contained the graves of 3 generations of Parkers, along with several family friends and farmhands who had become part of their extended family over the years. In the immediate aftermath of Benjamin's death, the family portrait was put away, the grief too fresh and the reminder too painful for daily viewing. The photograph remained stored in Martha's cedar chest for decades, occasionally brought out for special occasions or when visiting relatives wanted to see it. The image became a bittersweet reminder of the last time the family had been complete, a frozen moment of happiness that preceded an unimaginable tragedy. Years passed, and the Parker farm changed hands as children grew up and moved away or died. The original farmhouse was eventually sold to strangers, and many of the family's possessions were dispersed among relatives or donated to local historical societies. The family portrait, along with a collection of other photographs and documents, eventually found its way to the Ohio Historical Society, where it became part of their archives documenting rural life in the early 20th century. It wasn't until 1976 that the photograph would reveal its most startling secret. Margaret Hensley, a photography expert and historian working for the Historical Society, was conducting research on rural Ohio families when she came across the Parker portrait in the archives. Intrigued by the quality of the photograph and the tragic story associated with it, Margaret decided to examine the image more closely using newly available enhancement techniques. Margaret had access to advanced photographic equipment that allowed her to enlarge and enhance details that would have been invisible to earlier observers. She was particularly interested in studying the technical aspects of early 20th century portrait photography and hoped that the Parker photograph might provide insights into the methods and equipment used by professional photographers of that era. Working in her laboratory late one evening, Margaret placed the original photograph under a high-powered magnifying system and began systematically examining every detail of the image. She studied the clothing, the architecture of the farmhouse, the positioning of the family members, and the lighting conditions that Theodore Whitman had worked with on that October morning in 1904. When Margaret focused her attention on young Benjamin Parker, she immediately noticed something unusual about the boy's eyes. Even in the original photograph, there was something compelling about his gaze, something that seemed to draw the viewer's attention and hold it. Using her enhancement equipment, Margaret was able to magnify Benjamin's eyes to several times their original size, revealing details that would have been completely invisible without technological assistance. What she saw in those enlarged pupils made Margaret step back from her equipment in shock and disbelief. Instead of reflecting the expected image of the photographer and his camera, Benjamin's pupils contained what appeared to be a detailed reflection of a cemetery. Not just any cemetery, but a specific graveyard with distinctive headstones, monuments, and landscaping that Margaret could examine in remarkable detail. The reflection showed rows of weathered granite and marble headstones, some tall and elaborate, others simple and modest. Ancient oak trees provided shade over sections of the cemetery, and Margaret could even make out the pattern of pathways that wound between the graves. Most disturbing of all, she could identify what appeared to be a small, fresh grave in the foreground of the reflection, positioned exactly where a child's burial plot might be located. Margaret's initial reaction was to assume that she was seeing some kind of optical illusion or photographic artifact. She had encountered various types of unusual reflections and distortions in historical photographs, usually caused by technical limitations of early photographic equipment or environmental factors during the shooting process. However, the more closely she examined Benjamin's eyes, the more convinced she became that what she was seeing was real and inexplicable. The cemetery reflected in the boy's pupils was rendered with a level of detail and clarity that seemed impossible for a photographic artifact. Every headstone was individually distinct, with readable inscriptions and unique decorative elements. The shadows cast by the trees and monuments were consistent with specific lighting conditions, and the overall composition of the reflected scene had a three-dimensional quality that suggested depth and spatial relationships. Margaret spent the next several days researching the Parker family history, trying to understand more about Benjamin's death and the circumstances surrounding the family portrait. She discovered that the boy had been buried in the family cemetery on their farm, and she was able to obtain detailed records about the location and layout of that graveyard from county historical records. When Margaret compared the cemetery reflected in Benjamin's eyes with historical descriptions and photographs of the actual Parker family cemetery, she made a discovery that left her profoundly shaken. The reflection matched the real cemetery with startling accuracy, showing not just the general layout and major monuments, but specific details that could only have been visible to someone who had actually stood in that particular location. Most disturbing of all was the presence of the small, fresh grave in the foreground of the reflection. According to the historical records, Benjamin Parker had been buried in exactly that spot, a location that would have been empty ground at the time the family portrait was taken. The reflection seemed to show the cemetery as it would appear after Benjamin's death and burial, complete with his own headstone and the disturbed earth of his recent interment. Margaret's findings sent shockwaves through both the photography and paranormal research communities. She published her initial observations in a respected journal of photographic history, accompanied by detailed enlargements and technical analysis of the image. The article generated intense interest and controversy, with experts from various fields offering competing theories to explain the phenomenon. Some photography experts suggested that the reflection might be the result of double exposure or other technical anomalies that were common in early 20th century photography. They argued that Theodore Whitman might have inadvertently exposed the glass plate to images from another source, possibly while visiting the cemetery for a separate photographic project. However, this theory was challenged by several factors. First, Theodore's reputation for technical precision made it unlikely that he would have made such a basic error. Second, the reflection appeared only in Benjamin's pupils and was not visible anywhere else in the photograph, which would be unusual for a double exposure. Finally, research into Theodore's other work from that time period revealed no evidence that he had photographed any cemeteries in the weeks before or after the Parker portrait session. Paranormal researchers offered more exotic explanations, suggesting that Benjamin might have possessed some form of supernatural ability that allowed him to see his own future death. They pointed to the boy's unusual behavior during the portrait session, his intense focus on the camera lens, and the mysterious nature of his illness and death as evidence that something otherworldly had been at work. Skeptics dismissed these theories as wishful thinking and confirmation bias, arguing that the human mind has a tendency to find patterns and meaning in random or ambiguous visual information. They suggested that what Margaret Hensley had interpreted as a cemetery reflection might actually be some other collection of shapes and shadows that only resembled gravestones when viewed with preconceived expectations. To settle the controversy, Margaret invited several other photography experts to examine the original photograph using the same enhancement techniques she had employed. Dr. Robert Chen from the University of Chicago's Department of Photography brought his own advanced equipment to the Ohio Historical Society and conducted an independent analysis of the reflections in Benjamin's pupils. Dr. Chen's examination confirmed Margaret's findings in every detail. Not only could he clearly see the cemetery reflection, but his higher resolution equipment revealed even more disturbing elements. In the enhanced images, Dr. Chen could make out what appeared to be figures moving among the gravestones, shadowy forms that seemed to be walking along the pathways between graves. One figure in particular caught Dr. Chen's attention. In the reflection captured in Benjamin's left pupil, a small, childlike form appeared to be standing beside the fresh grave in the foreground. The figure was indistinct and could easily have been dismissed as a photographic artifact or shadow, but its size and positioning suggested a young person, possibly a boy, of about Benjamin's age. Dr. Chen's findings were corroborated by additional experts from institutions across the country. Each examination revealed the same basic elements: the cemetery reflection, the fresh grave, and the mysterious figures. The consistency of these observations across multiple independent examinations made it difficult to dismiss the phenomenon as simple misinterpretation or wishful thinking. As word of the discovery spread, the Parker family portrait became one of the most famous and controversial photographs in the history of paranormal research. The image was featured in documentaries, books, and academic papers, exploring the intersection of photography and supernatural phenomena. Museums and universities requested permission to examine the original photograph, and copies of the enhanced images were circulated widely among researchers and enthusiasts. The publicity surrounding the photograph also attracted the attention of surviving members of the Parker family. Benjamin's great-niece, Dorothy Whitfield, came forward with additional information about her ancestor's death and the circumstances surrounding the family portrait. Dorothy had grown up hearing stories about her great-uncle's mysterious illness and the strange events that followed his death. According to Dorothy, family legend held that Benjamin had begun experiencing unusual dreams and visions in the weeks before his death. The boy had reportedly told his mother about recurring nightmares in which he saw himself standing in the family cemetery, surrounded by relatives he didn't recognize. Benjamin had described seeing his own grave marker and had even provided details about the inscription and decorative elements that were later used on his actual headstone. These stories had been dismissed by the family as the product of a child's overactive imagination, but in light of the photograph's revelations, they took on a more ominous significance. Dorothy also mentioned that other family members had reported unusual experiences in the years following Benjamin's death, including sightings of a small boy playing near his grave and strange sounds coming from the Parker Cemetery at night. Margaret Hensley continued her research into the Parker family portrait for several more years, expanding her investigation to include interviews with local historians, examination of other photographs from the same time period, and detailed study of the technical aspects of Theodore Whitman's photographic methods. Her work culminated in a comprehensive book about the case, which became a bestseller and established her as one of the leading authorities on paranormal photography. One of Margaret's most intriguing discoveries came from her investigation into Theodore Whitman's background and career. She found that the photographer had experienced several other unusual incidents throughout his career, including portraits that seemed to predict future events and landscapes that captured scenes that observers insisted had never existed in reality. Theodore's own journal, discovered in his daughter's attic many years after his death, contained several references to what he called visionary sessions, photographic shoots, during which he felt that his camera was capturing more than just the physical appearance of his subjects. He wrote about experiencing moments of profound insight and connection during these sessions, as if the photographic process was opening windows into hidden dimensions of reality. The journal entry describing the Parker family portrait was particularly revealing. Theodore wrote that he had felt an overwhelming sense of sadness and foreboding while taking the photograph, despite the joyful nature of the family gathering. He described feeling as though he was documenting not just a moment of happiness, but also a profound loss that had not yet occurred. Most remarkably, Theodore's journal included a rough sketch of what he claimed to have seen, reflected in young Benjamin's eyes during the portrait session. The sketch showed a cemetery scene that matched almost exactly with the enhanced photographs that Margaret had produced decades later. This discovery provided powerful evidence that the reflection had been visible, at least to some degree, at the time the photograph was taken. The Parker family portrait continued to be studied and debated for decades after Margaret Hensley's initial discovery. Advances in digital photography and image enhancement technology allowed researchers to examine the photograph with ever-increasing levels of detail and precision. Each new analysis seemed to reveal additional layers of complexity and mystery within Benjamin's eye reflections. In the 1990s, computer analysis revealed that the cemetery reflection contained elements that appeared to shift slightly between Benjamin's left and right pupils, suggesting that the boy's eyes were capturing slightly different perspectives of the same scene, just as they would if he were actually looking at a real cemetery rather than posing for a photograph. Digital colorization techniques applied to the enhanced images revealed that the cemetery reflection appeared to have been captured during sunset or sunrise, with warm golden light illuminating the headstones and casting long shadows across the grass. This detail was particularly significant because the family portrait had been taken during mid-morning hours when the lighting conditions would have been completely different. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the discovery, using advanced pattern recognition software, that several of the headstones visible in Benjamin's eye reflections bore inscriptions that matched the names and dates of family members who were still alive at the time the photograph was taken, but who died in later years. The software was able to match these inscriptions with actual graves in the Parker family cemetery, suggesting that Benjamin's eyes had somehow captured an image of the cemetery as it would appear many years in the future. Throughout all of these investigations and discoveries, one question remained unanswered. Had Benjamin Parker somehow seen his own death and the deaths of his family members reflected in the photographer's camera lens? Or had the camera itself captured some glimpse of future events that existed beyond the normal bounds of space and time? the question touched on fundamental issues about the nature of consciousness, death, and the mysterious relationship between photography and reality. Some researchers suggested that the phenomenon might be related to quantum mechanical principles that were just beginning to be understood by scientists in the early 21st century. They theorized that the photographic process might occasionally capture quantum effects that allowed images from different times and places to become entangled and superimposed on a single frame. Others proposed that Benjamin himself might have possessed some form of psychic ability that allowed him to perceive future events, and that this ability had somehow been transmitted through his eyes to the photographic emulsion on Theodore's glass plate. This theory was supported by reports from other family members about Benjamin's unusual dreams and apparent premonitions in the weeks before his death. The mystery of the Parker family portrait remained unsolved as the 20th century drew to a close and the 21st century began. The original photograph continued to be preserved in the archives of the Ohio Historical Society, where it was occasionally displayed for special exhibitions and made available to qualified researchers for study. The enhanced images showing Benjamin's eye reflections became some of the most widely circulated examples of allegedly paranormal photography, appearing in countless books, websites, and documentaries about supernatural phenomena. The case inspired numerous fictional adaptations and became a touchstone for discussions about the possibility that photography might be capable of capturing more than just the physical appearance of the material world. For those who knew the story, every viewing of the Parker family portrait carried an emotional weight that went far beyond its historical or artistic significance. Here was a moment of joy and togetherness, captured with technical precision and artistic skill, that also contained within it a preview of tragedy and loss that no one present could have imagined. Benjamin Parker stands at the front of his family, small, serious, and focused. His bright eyes are fixed on the camera lens with an intensity that seems to burn across the decades. In those eyes, enhanced by technology that wouldn't exist for 70 years after his death, lies a reflection of gravestones and shadows, of pathways winding between monuments to the dead, and of a small, fresh grave waiting to receive the body of a 6-year-old boy who would die before the photographs could even be delivered to his family. The image raises questions that may never be answered about the nature of time, death, and human consciousness. It challenges our understanding of what photography can and cannot capture, and it suggests that the boundary between the present moment and future events might not be as solid and impermeable as we like to believe. As researchers continue to study the Parker family portrait with ever more sophisticated technology, new details and mysteries continue to emerge. Each enhancement reveals additional layers of complexity within Benjamin's eye reflections, as if the photograph contains an infinite depth of information waiting to be discovered by those with the tools and persistence to look for it. The story of the Parker family portrait serves as a reminder that the world around us may contain far more mystery and wonder than our everyday experience would suggest. In the space of a few seconds during a routine family gathering on an ordinary October morning in 1904, something extraordinary was captured on a glass photographic plate, something that continues to challenge our understanding of reality more than a century later. Whether the reflection in Benjamin Parker's eyes represents a genuine glimpse into future events, an unexplained photographic phenomenon, or something else entirely, it stands as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that the universe may hold secrets far stranger and more wonderful than we dare to imagine. The boy's intense gaze reaches across the decades, carrying with it a mystery that may never be fully understood, but will never be forgotten by those who have looked into his eyes and seen their own mortality reflected in the shadows of an impossible cemetery. The investigation into the Parker family portrait took an unexpected turn in 2003 when Dr. Helena Vasquez, a neuroscientist specializing in visual perception at Stanford University, became interested in the case. Dr. Vasquez had been studying the neurological basis of psychic phenomena and was particularly intrigued by reports of individuals who claimed to see future events through various forms of extrasensory perception. The Parker photograph represented a unique opportunity to examine potential evidence of precognitive ability using scientific methods that hadn't been available to earlier researchers. Dr. Vasquez approached the case from a completely different angle than previous investigators. Rather than focusing solely on the photographic evidence, she began researching the medical history of Benjamin Parker and his extended family, looking for any genetic or neurological factors that might explain the boy's apparent ability to see future events. Her investigation required extensive genealogical research and the cooperation of living Parker descendants scattered across multiple states. Working with a team of graduate students and research assistants, Dr. Vasquez traced the Parker family lineage back 6 generations and forward to the present day. What she discovered was a pattern of unusual neurological traits that seemed to run in the family, particularly among the males. Several Parker men throughout history had been described as having extraordinary intuitive abilities, uncanny luck in avoiding accidents and disasters, and a tendency to experience vivid prophetic dreams. Benjamin's great-great-grandfather, Josiah Parker, had been renowned in his community for his ability to predict weather patterns with remarkable accuracy, often warning neighbors of severe storms days before they occurred. Family records indicated that Josiah's predictions had saved numerous lives and prevented significant property damage throughout his lifetime. His abilities were so well regarded that farmers from neighboring counties would seek his advice before planting or harvesting their crops. Benjamin's grandfather, also named Benjamin, had reportedly experienced detailed visions of Civil War battles before they occurred. Family letters preserved in the Ohio Historical Society described how the elder Benjamin had warned his regiment about specific ambush locations and tactical maneuvers that their enemies would employ. His commanding officers initially dismissed his warnings as nervous speculation. But after several of his predictions proved accurate, they began to take his insights seriously and credited him with saving numerous lives. Dr. Vasquez's research revealed that this pattern of unusual abilities had continued into Benjamin's generation. His older brother, Marcus, had died tragically young, but family members recalled that he had frequently spoken about seeing people who weren't there, particularly elderly relatives who had died before he was born. Marcus had described these apparitions in vivid detail, providing information about their personalities and life histories that he couldn't possibly have known through normal means. The neurological connection became even more intriguing when Dr. Vasquez discovered that several living Parker descendants had been diagnosed with various forms of temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that some researchers had linked to enhanced intuitive abilities and mystical experiences. The temporal lobe is responsible for processing visual and auditory information, forming memories, and regulating emotional responses. Abnormal electrical activity in this region of the brain can sometimes produce vivid hallucinations, out-of-body experiences, and apparent glimpses of past or future events. Dr. Vasquez hypothesized that Benjamin Parker might have possessed a genetic predisposition to temporal lobe abnormalities that enhanced his ability to perceive information beyond the normal limits of sensory experience. She theorized that during the intense focus required for the family portrait, Benjamin's brain might have entered an altered state of consciousness that allowed him to perceive future events that were somehow encoded in the quantum structure of the photographic process itself. This theory was supported by emerging research in quantum consciousness, a field that explored the possibility that human awareness might operate according to quantum mechanical principles rather than classical physics. Some scientists had proposed that consciousness might exist in a quantum superposition state, allowing it to access information from multiple timelines simultaneously until the act of observation collapsed the quantum state into a single reality. To test her hypothesis, Dr. Vasquez arranged to have the original Parker photograph examined using advanced brain imaging technology that could analyze the neural patterns reflected in the eyes of photographic subjects. This technique, developed for forensic applications, used sophisticated algorithms to reconstruct the visual cortex activity of individuals at the moment a photograph was taken. The results of this analysis were both fascinating and disturbing. The reconstructed brain patterns from Benjamin's eyes showed activity in regions associated with temporal lobe seizures, but also revealed neural firing patterns that didn't match any known neurological condition. The boy's visual cortex appeared to have been processing multiple overlapping visual inputs simultaneously, as if he were seeing several different scenes superimposed on one another. Most remarkably, the analysis revealed that Benjamin's brain had been processing visual information at frequencies far beyond the normal range of human perception. The pattern suggested that his nervous system had been operating in an accelerated state that would have allowed him to perceive events occurring at different temporal frequencies, potentially including glimpses of future possibilities that existed in quantum superposition. Dr. Vasquez's findings attracted significant attention from both the scientific community and popular media. Her research was featured in several peer-reviewed journals and spawned a new field of study that combined neuroscience, quantum physics, and paranormal research. However, her work also generated considerable controversy, with skeptics arguing that she was reading too much significance into ambiguous data and that the apparent neural patterns could be explained by photographic artifacts or equipment malfunction. The debate intensified when Dr. Vasquez announced that she had identified several living individuals who appeared to possess similar neurological traits to those she had reconstructed from Benjamin Parker's photograph. These contemporary subjects had agreed to participate in controlled experiments designed to test their ability to perceive future events under laboratory conditions. The experiments involved having subjects view photographs while their brain activity was monitored using advanced electroencephalography equipment. The photographs were selected randomly from a large database and included images that depicted various scenes and events. The subjects were asked to describe any impressions or visions they experienced while viewing each image. The results were mixed, but intriguing. Several subjects demonstrated a statistically significant ability to provide accurate information about photographs they hadn't seen, and a few were able to describe events that occurred after the photographs were taken. However, the effect was inconsistent and seemed to be influenced by numerous variables, including the subject's emotional state, environmental conditions, and the specific content of the photographs. One subject, a 32-year-old woman named Rachel Morrison, who was descended from Benjamin Parker's cousin, produced particularly compelling results. During one experimental session, Rachel was shown a family portrait from 1923 and immediately became agitated, describing visions of a house fire and people trapped inside a burning building. Research later revealed that the house shown in the background of the photograph had indeed burned down 6 months after the picture was taken, resulting in the deaths of 3 family members. Rachel's abilities seemed to be strongest when viewing photographs that contained reflective surfaces, particularly images that showed people's eyes in clear detail. Dr. Vasquez theorized that the eyes might serve as a kind of quantum antenna that could receive and transmit information across temporal boundaries under specific conditions. The research program expanded to include collaboration with physics departments at several major universities, as scientists attempted to understand the theoretical framework that might explain how consciousness could interact with photographic processes to capture images of future events. The work required combining insights from quantum mechanics, neuroscience, optics, and information theory in ways that challenged traditional academic boundaries. Dr. Michael Chen, a quantum physicist at MIT, proposed that photographic emulsions might be capable of recording quantum information that existed in superposition states until the film was developed. According to his theory, the act of photographing a subject with unusual neurological properties might collapse quantum wave functions in ways that encoded future possibilities into the photographic medium. This hypothesis was tested using specially prepared photographic plates that were exposed to quantum fields under controlled laboratory conditions. The results showed that photographic emulsions could indeed record quantum information, but extracting meaningful data from these recordings required enhancement techniques that wouldn't be developed until decades after the original exposures. Meanwhile, additional analysis of the Parker family portrait, using ever more sophisticated digital enhancement techniques, continued to reveal new details and mysteries. High-resolution scans of Benjamin's eye reflections showed architectural details of the cemetery that matched historical records with impossible precision, including the specific patterns of stonework on monuments that had been installed years after the boy's death. Even more disturbing was the discovery that the cemetery reflection appeared to show seasonal variations across Benjamin's two eyes, with his left eye reflecting the graveyard in winter conditions, while his right eye showed the same location during summer months. This detail suggested that the boy might have been simultaneously viewing multiple temporal snapshots of the same location. Computer analysis of the shadowy figures visible among the gravestones revealed additional chilling details. Enhanced images showed that these figures appeared to be wearing clothing styles from different historical periods, as if representatives from multiple generations were gathering in the cemetery at the same time. Some of the figures could be tentatively identified as members of the Parker family based on their resemblance to other historical photographs, including individuals who were still alive when Benjamin's portrait was taken. The figure of the small child standing beside the fresh grave became a particular focus of investigation. Advanced facial recognition software suggested that this figure bore a strong resemblance to Benjamin himself, but appeared slightly older than the 6-year-old boy in the family portrait. The ghostly child seemed to be looking directly out from the reflection, creating an unsettling effect of making eye contact with viewers across the decades. As word of these discoveries spread through online communities dedicated to paranormal research, the Parker family portrait became the subject of intense speculation and debate. Thousands of amateur investigators downloaded high-resolution copies of the enhanced images and conducted their own analyses, often claiming to discover additional hidden details that had been missed by professional researchers. Some enthusiasts reported finding coded messages in the patterns of shadows and light within Benjamin's eye reflections, while others claimed to identify specific dates and times embedded in the cemetery imagery. Most of these claims were dismissed by serious researchers as examples of pareidolia, the tendency for human minds to perceive meaningful patterns in random or ambiguous visual information. However, a few amateur discoveries proved to be legitimate and significant. A retired mathematics teacher from Wisconsin noticed that the positioning of the headstones in Benjamin's eye reflection seemed to follow a specific geometric pattern that corresponded to astronomical configurations on the date of the boy's death. This observation led to additional research that revealed correlations between the cemetery layout and celestial events that occurred throughout Benjamin's brief lifetime. The astronomical connection opened up entirely new avenues of investigation. Researchers began examining the astrological and astronomical conditions present at the time the Parker family portrait was taken, looking for environmental factors that might have influenced the mysterious photographic phenomenon. They discovered that the portrait session had occurred during a rare alignment of planets that created unusual electromagnetic conditions in Earth's atmosphere. Solar activity had also been unusually intense during that period, producing geomagnetic disturbances that some theorists suggested might have affected the sensitivity of photographic equipment to quantum effects. Dr. Sarah Kellerman, an astrophysicist at the University of California, proposed that the combination of astronomical factors present in October 1904 might have created conditions that temporarily weakened the barriers between different temporal dimensions. According to her theory, sensitive individuals like Benjamin Parker might have been able to perceive information from alternate timelines during these periods of cosmic instability. This hypothesis was supported by historical research that revealed an unusually high number of reported paranormal phenomena during the weeks surrounding the Parker portrait session. Local newspapers from that time period contained numerous accounts of ghost sightings, prophetic dreams, and unexplained photographic anomalies throughout the region. The investigation took another unexpected turn when researchers discovered that Theodore Whitman, the photographer who had taken the Parker family portrait, had experienced his own series of mysterious visions and premonitions throughout his career. His personal journal, which had been donated to a photography museum in New York, contained detailed descriptions of psychic experiences that had occurred during various portrait sessions. Theodore wrote extensively about his belief that photography was capable of capturing more than just the physical appearance of subjects, describing the camera as a kind of spiritual instrument that could record the essence of souls and the energy patterns that connected all living beings. He had developed specific techniques that he believed enhanced the metaphysical properties of his photographs, including special preparations of his photographic chemicals and ritualistic approaches to positioning his subjects. The photographer's journal revealed that he had been deeply influenced by the spiritualist movement that was popular during his lifetime, attending seances and studying various forms of occult philosophy. He had incorporated these beliefs into his professional practice, viewing each portrait session as an opportunity to create a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. Most significantly, Theodore's journal contained a detailed account of the Parker family portrait session that provided new insights into Benjamin's behavior and the unusual conditions present that day. The photographer described feeling an overwhelming sense of spiritual presence during the session, as if unseen entities were gathered around the family to witness the creation of the photograph. Theodore wrote that Benjamin had seemed to be in communication with these invisible presences, occasionally glancing toward empty spaces around the porch and nodding as if responding to unheard voices. The photographer had initially attributed this behavior to childhood imagination, but the intensity and consistency of Benjamin's responses had eventually convinced him that the boy was genuinely interacting with supernatural entities. The journal entry also revealed that Theodore had experienced his own visions during the portrait session, seeing brief glimpses of the Parker family cemetery and the small grave that would eventually hold Benjamin's body. The photographer had been so disturbed by these visions that he had nearly ended the session early, but something had compelled him to continue and complete the portrait. These revelations from Theodore's journal provided additional evidence that the mysterious phenomena captured in Benjamin's eyes were not simply photographic artifacts or later interpretations, but represented genuine supernatural experiences that had been witnessed by multiple individuals present during the portrait session. The discovery of Theodore's journal also led researchers to examine his other photographic work more closely, searching for additional examples of paranormal imagery that might have been overlooked by previous investigators. This research revealed several other portraits that contained unusual elements, including reflected scenes that didn't match the subject's actual surroundings and facial expressions that seemed to change when viewed from different angles. One particularly disturbing example was a wedding portrait taken by Theodore just 2 months before the Parker family session. The bride's bouquet appeared to contain flowers that were wilted and dying when examined under enhancement, despite having been fresh and vibrant during the actual ceremony. The couple in the photograph divorced acrimoniously within a year, and the bride died in a carriage accident shortly afterward. Another portrait showed a prosperous businessman whose success and happiness were evident in every aspect of the formal photograph. Yet enhancement revealed that his shadow fell in a direction that was impossible given the lighting conditions present during the session. The shadow seemed to point toward a specific location that was later discovered to be the site where the man would lose his fortune in a failed business venture. These additional examples suggested that Theodore Whitman possessed his own supernatural abilities that allowed him to capture prophetic imagery through his photography, and that his collaboration with subjects who had similar gifts might have amplified these effects to create phenomena like the Parker family portrait. The mounting evidence of genuine paranormal activity connected to the photograph led to increased interest from religious and spiritual communities, who saw Benjamin Parker's story as proof of life after death and the existence of divine providence. Several churches incorporated the Parker family portrait into their teachings about the afterlife, using Benjamin's apparent ability to see his own death as evidence that souls possessed knowledge of their eternal destiny. However, the religious interpretation of the photograph was challenged by philosophers and theologians who argued that if Benjamin had truly seen his own death reflected in the camera, he should have been able to prevent it, or at least warn others about what was going to happen. The fact that the boy had remained silent about his visions, if indeed he had experienced them, raised troubling questions about free will and predestination. Some religious scholars suggested that Benjamin's silence might have been divinely ordained, representing a test of faith for his family and future generations who would discover the truth decades later. According to this interpretation, the boy had been chosen as an instrument of divine revelation, sacrificing his own life to provide proof of supernatural reality to a world increasingly dominated by scientific materialism. Others argued that Benjamin's apparent precognition might represent evidence of reincarnation or soul migration, suggesting that the boy had carried memories of previous lives or future incarnations that allowed him to perceive events beyond his current temporal existence. This theory was supported by reports from family members that Benjamin had occasionally demonstrated knowledge of family history and deceased relatives that seemed impossible for a 6-year-old child to possess through normal means. The debate over the religious significance of the Parker family portrait became particularly intense within academic circles, where scholars struggled to reconcile the apparent evidence of supernatural phenomena with the materialist worldview that dominated modern intellectual discourse. Some universities began offering courses that examined the intersection of science and spirituality, using the Parker photograph as a case study in the limits of scientific knowledge. Dr. James Harrison, a professor of comparative religion at Harvard University, spent several years studying the cultural and historical context of Benjamin Parker's story, examining how different religious traditions might interpret the boy's apparent ability to see his own death. His research revealed that many cultures throughout history had recognized certain individuals as possessing prophetic abilities, often viewing these gifts as signs of divine favor or spiritual advancement. Dr. Harrison's work showed that Benjamin's experience fit into a broader pattern of childhood mysticism that had been documented across numerous cultures and historical periods. He identified similar cases of children who had demonstrated supernatural abilities shortly before their deaths, often leaving behind evidence of their extraordinary gifts that was only recognized years later by subsequent generations. The professor's research also revealed that the time period during which Benjamin lived, the early years of the 20th century, was characterized by particular spiritual turbulence, as traditional religious beliefs came into conflict with emerging scientific theories and technological innovations. This cultural tension might have created conditions that were especially conducive to supernatural manifestations, as individuals sought to reconcile ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. The Parker family portrait continued to generate new research and discoveries well into the 21st century, with each technological advance revealing additional layers of mystery within Benjamin's enigmatic gaze. The photograph became a touchstone for discussions about consciousness, mortality, and the nature of time itself, inspiring artists, writers, and philosophers to explore the implications of a universe where the boundaries between past, present, and future might be more fluid than previously imagined. As research into the photograph continued, it became clear that Benjamin Parker's story represented more than just an isolated supernatural incident, but rather a window into fundamental questions about the nature of human consciousness and its relationship to the physical world. The boy's intense stare across the decades served as a reminder that reality might contain dimensions of experience that science was only beginning to understand, and that the mystery of existence itself might be far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had dared to imagine. The investigation entered a new phase in 2008 when Dr. Amanda Reeves, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Pennsylvania, received permission to conduct a limited archaeological examination of the Parker family cemetery. Dr. Reeves had become interested in the case after reading Dr. Vasquez's research and believed that physical evidence from Benjamin's burial site might provide additional clues about the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death and the prophetic elements captured in the family portrait. The excavation was conducted with the utmost care and respect, following strict archaeological protocols and working closely with surviving Parker family descendants to ensure that their ancestors' remains were treated with appropriate dignity. The team used ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques to map the cemetery layout before beginning any actual digging, hoping to correlate the physical evidence with the cemetery reflection visible in Benjamin's eyes. What Dr. Reeves discovered beneath the modest headstone marking Benjamin's gravesite challenged conventional understanding of both archaeology and supernatural phenomena. The boy's coffin, which should have been constructed of simple pine wood according to family records and period customs, was found to be made of an unusual metal alloy that didn't match any known materials from the early 20th century. Chemical analysis of the coffin material revealed a composition that included trace elements not found naturally on Earth, suggesting either advanced metallurgical techniques that were unknown in 1904 or the presence of extraterrestrial materials. The metal showed signs of having been exposed to extremely high temperatures and electromagnetic fields, creating crystalline structures that gave it an almost glass-like appearance in certain sections. Even more puzzling was the discovery that Benjamin's remains showed no signs of normal decomposition, despite having been buried for over a century. The boy's body appeared to be in a state of perfect preservation, as if the unusual properties of the metal coffin had somehow arrested the natural processes of decay. His clothing, hair, and even the flowers that had been placed with him at burial remained intact and vibrant. Dr. Reeves noted that Benjamin's eyes remained open and clear, still reflecting light in a way that seemed almost supernatural. When examined under magnification, the boy's pupils continued to show the same cemetery reflection that had been captured in the family portrait, but with even greater clarity and detail than what had been visible in the enhanced photographs. The preserved state of Benjamin's remains raised disturbing questions about the nature of his death and the circumstances that had led to his burial in such an unusual coffin. Family records indicated that the boy had been interred in a standard wooden casket purchased from the local undertaker. Yet, the physical evidence clearly contradicted these historical documents. Dr. Reeves expanded her investigation to include examination of soil samples from around the gravesite, hoping to find clues about how the metal coffin had come to replace the original wooden casket. The soil analysis revealed unusual mineral deposits and electromagnetic signatures that suggested the area had been subjected to intense energy fields at some point after Benjamin's initial burial. Carbon dating of organic materials found near the grave provided additional puzzling results. While Benjamin's body and clothing showed consistent dates from the early 20th century, some of the soil samples and plant materials contained carbon isotopes that suggested much more recent disturbance, as if the grave had been opened and resealed sometime within the past few decades. This discovery led Dr. Reeves to investigate reports of unusual activity in the Parker family cemetery that had been documented by local residents over the years. Her research uncovered numerous accounts of strange lights, unexplained sounds, and mysterious figures seen moving among the gravestones, particularly during the anniversary period surrounding Benjamin's death. One particularly detailed account came from a security guard who had been hired to patrol the area in the 1980s after a series of vandalism incidents at historical sites throughout the county. The guard, Robert Mitchell, reported observing what appeared to be a formal burial ceremony taking place in the Parker Cemetery during the early morning hours of October 15, 1986, exactly 82 years after Benjamin's original death. According to Mitchell's report, the ceremony had involved approximately a dozen individuals dressed in clothing from various historical periods, including some who appeared to be wearing garments from the 19th century and others in more contemporary attire. The participants had moved silently through the cemetery, carrying what appeared to be a metallic coffin that gleamed with an otherworldly light. Mitchell described watching in fascination and terror as the group proceeded to Benjamin's gravesite and appeared to perform some kind of ritual that involved opening the existing grave and replacing its contents with the mysterious metal coffin. The entire ceremony had been conducted without any visible excavation equipment, yet the earth seemed to part naturally, as if responding to some unseen force. The security guard's account had been dismissed at the time as the product of imagination or psychological stress, but Dr. Reeves's archaeological findings provided physical evidence that supported Mitchell's extraordinary claims. The timeline he described matched perfectly with the carbon dating results that suggested recent disturbance of the gravesite. Dr. Reeves attempted to locate Mitchell for follow-up interviews, but discovered that the man had disappeared shortly after filing his report about the cemetery incident. His family and co-workers reported that he had become increasingly obsessed with supernatural phenomena following his experience at the Parker Cemetery, spending long hours researching occult subjects and claiming to receive messages from supernatural entities. The investigation into Mitchell's disappearance led Dr. Reeves to uncover a pattern of mysterious vanishings connected to individuals who had become too deeply involved in researching the Parker family portrait. Over the years, several academics, journalists, and amateur investigators had simply disappeared without explanation after announcing breakthroughs in their understanding of Benjamin's story. Dr. Patricia Coleman, a psychology professor who had been studying the photograph's effects on human perception, had vanished from her office at Yale University in 1994, leaving behind only a collection of enhanced images showing progressively more detailed views of Benjamin's eye reflections. Her research notes contained increasingly frantic observations about hidden messages and warnings embedded within the cemetery imagery. Similarly, investigative journalist Mark Stevens had disappeared in 2001 while working on a book about the Parker family portrait for a major publishing house. Stevens had been interviewing elderly residents of the area where the Parker farm had been located, seeking first-hand accounts of unusual phenomena associated with the family cemetery. His car was found abandoned on a rural road near the former Parker property, but no trace of Stevens himself was ever discovered. These disappearances created an atmosphere of fear and superstition around the Parker family portrait that discouraged many researchers from pursuing in-depth investigations. Some scholars began to whisper about a curse associated with the photograph, suggesting that those who delved too deeply into its mysteries risked supernatural retribution from forces that preferred to keep their secrets hidden. Dr. Reeves, however, remained undeterred by these warnings and continued her archaeological investigation with increasing determination. She believed that the physical evidence from Benjamin's gravesite held the key to understanding not only the boy's mysterious death, but also the broader supernatural phenomena that seemed to surround his story. Her team's analysis of the metal coffin revealed additional extraordinary properties that defied conventional scientific explanation. The material appeared to exist in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously displaying characteristics of both solid matter and electromagnetic energy. When subjected to various forms of radiation and electrical stimulation, the coffin would emit complex patterns of light and sound that seemed to contain encoded information. Dr. Marcus Webb, a quantum physicist from Caltech who had joined Dr. Reeves's research team, suggested that the coffin might be constructed from a form of programmable matter that could store and replay quantum information across extended periods of time. According to his theory, Benjamin's consciousness might have somehow been encoded into the molecular structure of the coffin material, allowing his awareness to persist beyond physical death. This hypothesis was supported by experiments that demonstrated the coffin's ability to respond to specific types of electromagnetic stimulation by producing holographic projections that showed scenes from Benjamin's life and death. These projections appeared as three-dimensional images that could be viewed from multiple angles and contained details that had never been documented in any historical records. One particularly detailed projection showed Benjamin's final moments, revealing that the boy had not died from illness, as family records indicated, but had apparently been visited by otherworldly entities who had somehow extracted his consciousness from his physical body. The holographic record showed these beings as tall, luminous figures who communicated through patterns of light and sound rather than conventional speech. The entities appeared to have been conducting some form of experiment or procedure that involved transferring Benjamin's awareness into a different dimensional framework, allowing him to perceive future events and alternate timelines. The boy's death had been a necessary part of this process, enabling his consciousness to exist simultaneously across multiple temporal states. These revelations provided a radically different interpretation of the Parker family portrait, and Benjamin's apparent ability to see his own death reflected in the camera lens. Rather than representing a tragic case of childhood precognition, the photograph might actually document the moment when Benjamin's consciousness was being prepared for dimensional translation by advanced beings from another realm of existence. Dr. Webb's analysis of the holographic projections revealed that the otherworldly entities possessed technology far beyond human understanding, capable of manipulating space, time, and consciousness in ways that violated known laws of physics. Their interest in Benjamin appeared to be related to his unique neurological properties, which made him an ideal subject for their interdimensional experiments. The physicists theorized that similar entities might have been operating throughout human history, selecting individuals with specific genetic and neurological characteristics for various forms of consciousness research. Benjamin Parker might represent just one example of a much larger pattern of supernatural intervention in human affairs. This theory was supported by Dr. Reeves's discovery of similar metal coffins at other historical burial sites throughout the region. Ground-penetrating radar surveys revealed at least 6 additional graves containing the same type of advanced burial containers, all associated with individuals who had displayed unusual abilities or had been involved in mysterious circumstances surrounding their deaths. The pattern suggested that the entities responsible for Benjamin's transformation had been conducting long-term studies of human consciousness. Using the Parker family cemetery and other locations as research facilities for their interdimensional experiments. The preservation of their subjects' bodies in the quantum coffins allowed them to maintain access to consciousness patterns across extended periods. Dr. Reeves's team attempted to establish communication with the entities by using electromagnetic signals designed to resonate with the quantum properties of Benjamin's coffin. These experiments produced extraordinary results, including direct telepathic contact with what appeared to be Benjamin's consciousness existing in an enhanced state of awareness. The communications revealed that Benjamin had indeed been chosen by the entities because of his family's genetic predisposition to temporal lobe abnormalities and psychic sensitivity. His consciousness had been expanded to encompass multiple dimensional frameworks, allowing him to perceive events across vast spans of time and space. Benjamin's awareness, speaking through electromagnetic patterns that were translated by quantum computers, explained that his apparent death had been necessary to free his consciousness from the limitations of linear time. In his enhanced state, he could observe the entire span of human history simultaneously, witnessing both past and future events as if they were occurring in the present moment. The boy's consciousness revealed that the cemetery reflection captured in his eyes during the family portrait had shown not just his own future grave, but a viewing portal through which he could observe the activities of the interdimensional entities across multiple timelines. The photograph had essentially documented the moment when his awareness was being prepared for expansion beyond normal human limitations. Through these communications, Benjamin warned that the entity's experiments were part of a larger project involving the gradual transformation of human consciousness. Selected individuals throughout history had been chosen for dimensional translation, their enhanced awareness contributing to a growing network of interdimensional observers who monitored the development of terrestrial civilization. The boy's consciousness also revealed that the disappearances of researchers who had become too deeply involved in investigating his story were not random events, but represented recruitment into the entity's consciousness expansion program. Those individuals had been selected based on their demonstrated ability to perceive supernatural phenomena and their willingness to pursue knowledge regardless of personal risk. Dr. Patricia Coleman, the psychology professor who had vanished from Yale, had reportedly achieved successful dimensional translation and now existed as part of the Interdimensional Observer Network. Her consciousness had been expanded to encompass vast reaches of space and time, allowing her to study the development of awareness across multiple planetary civilizations. Similarly, journalist Mark Stevens had been recruited into the program after demonstrating exceptional ability to perceive hidden patterns and connections within the Parker family mystery. His investigative skills had been enhanced through dimensional translation, enabling him to monitor information flows across different temporal frameworks. Benjamin's consciousness warned Dr. Reeves that her own research had attracted the attention of the interdimensional entities and that she might soon be offered the opportunity to join their consciousness expansion program. The choice would be entirely voluntary, but once made, there would be no possibility of returning to normal human existence. The warnings proved prophetic when Dr. Reeves began experiencing vivid dreams and visions that seemed to originate from sources outside her normal awareness. The visions showed her glimpses of vast cosmic landscapes populated by beings of pure consciousness who existed beyond the limitations of physical form. These entities communicated through patterns of thought and emotion that transcended conventional language, offering knowledge and understanding that far exceeded anything available through traditional human learning. Dr. Reeves found herself increasingly drawn to these visionary experiences, spending long hours in meditation and attempting to establish deeper contact with the interdimensional entities. Her research team noticed dramatic changes in her behavior and thinking patterns as she began to demonstrate abilities that seemed to transcend normal human capabilities. The archaeologist's enhanced awareness allowed her to perceive quantum information stored within the metal coffins at multiple burial sites, revealing details about the entity's long-term project that had never been documented in any historical records. She discovered that the consciousness expansion program had been operating for thousands of years, with recruitment occurring during periods of significant cultural and technological transition. Benjamin Parker's era, the early 20th century, had been identified by the entities as a crucial turning point in human development, when traditional spiritual beliefs were being challenged by emerging scientific understanding. The boy's recruitment had been part of a larger effort to preserve and enhance human consciousness during this period of transition. Dr. Reeves's investigation revealed that similar recruitment operations had occurred throughout history, with enhanced individuals being placed at key moments to influence the development of human civilization. Many historical figures known for their extraordinary insights and abilities might actually have been participants in the entity's consciousness expansion program. The implications of these discoveries extended far beyond the mystery of Benjamin Parker's family portrait, suggesting that human history itself might have been guided by interdimensional beings working to facilitate the evolution of terrestrial consciousness. The photograph that had started as a simple family memento had become a window into a vast cosmic project involving the transformation of awareness itself. As Dr. Reeves delved deeper into the interdimensional entities project, she began to understand that her own recruitment was inevitable. Her enhanced perception allowed her to see that the choice between remaining in normal human consciousness or accepting dimensional translation was not really a choice at all, but rather a natural progression for individuals who had developed sufficient awareness to perceive the entity's existence. The Parker family portrait, with Benjamin's enigmatic gaze and the cemetery reflection in his eyes, stood as a testament to the ongoing presence of forces beyond human understanding that continued to shape the development of consciousness on Earth. The boy's story had revealed that death itself might be merely a transition to enhanced forms of awareness that transcended the limitations of physical existence, offering possibilities for understanding and experience that were literally beyond imagination.